Well, I hope very much that this will be the last section before I get on to my story proper. However, here we are, final bit with any luck of setting the scene. Dad grew almost all of our vegetables, including potatoes. Some relatives and other people we knew had fruit trees and would pass on fruit to Mum. She preserved fruit for eating in winter, made jam and chutneys, rather along the lines of Branston-type pickle or relish. Mum also pickled onions and red cabbage. The fruit, onions and red cabbage were kept in big jars known as Kilner jars. The fruit was in syrup, the onions and red cabbage in seasoned vinegar. One reason for preserving in this way, apart from being very tasty, was that home refrigerators and freezers were very uncommon. I didn't have one until going to the States in 1965. What we did have was a larder or pantry. This usually led off the kitchen in the coolest part of the house. In ordinary houses it was a very small walk-in room with shelves for storing bottles, jars, tins and packets. Along one wall was a large shelf that was a thick stone or concrete slab. That was for putting things on that needed keeping cold, like butter, milk and cheese. Beneath it we had a meat safe, a cupboard with a wire mesh door, both for keeping the meat cool and keeping flies out. In really hot weather our milk, in bottles, stood in a bucket of cold water to stop it souring. Although by the mid-1950s some frozen foods were available, such as fish fingers, they had to be eaten within a day or so as they could not be kept longer without a freezer, and our meat was bought almost every day too. The only real convenience foods we had regularly that I remember were gravy powder and stock cubes, Bisto and Oxo, bird's custard powder, blancmange powders, jelly, or to the Americans Jello cubes, biscuits, cookies, and crackers. Tinned foods such as peas, baked beans, soup and some fruit were available as well. Mum always made her own mint sauce and apple sauce. We might occasionally have a shop-bought cake, but mostly Mum made those too. The only fast food outlets and takeaways were fish and chip shops as far as I was aware. These did not sell any kinds of meats or the extras you can get now. There were no convenience pet foods either. Once a week Uncle drove to Bedford to buy cheap meat especially for use as pet food. We reckoned it was horse meat or some such. He had big walk-in refrigerators at the back of the butcher's shop that he managed in Bletchley, so all the meat there kept fresh. Although there were no refrigerated display areas, the meat was cut to order on wooden-topped counters. Mum used to boil the pet food meat for Bess, our dog, and feed her a portion of it once a day in the evening with some of the stock and either cornflakes or shredded wheat mixed in. Bess always seemed healthy enough on the diet. The meat smelled lovely when it was boiling, and I've been known to steal a piece. It didn't do me any harm either, whatever it was. Dog biscuits were available, and Uncle bought those for Fritz, their German Shepherd dog, or Alsatian as they were known at that time. The dog biscuit was something else that I would eat. The black ones were my favourites. Nearly all types of dry foods in the earlier years of my life were sold loose by weight. Throughout my childhood milk was delivered daily to the doorstep during the week in pint bottles. It was full cream milk. I knew nothing of semi-skimmed or skimmed. It was not homogenized either as now, but had a layer of cream on top. Mostly the bottle would be shaken to mix the milk and cream. On a Sunday though, especially, we sometimes had top of the milk on tinned fruit for tea. The baker's van came round daily too, with freshly baked uncut loaves and rolls. We didn't have any sliced bread. At Bletchley, the milk came from the Co-op dairy and the bread from their bakery. Mum bought milk and bread checks at the Co-op shop. These were plastic tokens. She would leave milk tokens out with the empty bottles on the doorstep, for however many pints she wanted. The man who delivered the bread was paid with the bread checks. If you weren't in, you could leave a bag containing your bread tokens hanging on the front doorknob. As I say, we had no sliced bread, and the bread varieties were just white and wholemeal, although that was much less common than now. but we could buy differently shaped loaves. We always had white bread for cutting, usually a crusty farmhouse loaf. I like the really crusty cottage loaf Mum sometimes bought, which is one smaller round of dough on top of a large one. Even better were the little cottage loaf-shaped rolls. Miniature wholemeal Hovis loaves were a treat too, split and buttered. Meat and fish would be bought fresh, as they wouldn't keep long without refrigeration. There was at least one fishmonger in every town, as well as a butcher. In the villages, a van selling fresh, raw fish, what was known as wet fish, often came round once a week on a Friday. Vegetables and fruit were mainly seasonal, unless they were tinned. It was too expensive to fly in goods for the general market. Citrus fruits from the Mediterranean came in by boat, as did bananas from the Caribbean. We could buy grapes, and sometimes saw fresh pineapples, peaches and apricots. They were all quite expensive though, and I don't remember any vegetables being brought in. For her main groceries, Mum had an order book with carbon paper, so that each order had a copy. After making her list, she took the book to the co-op. She left it there, and her order was made up, with the prices written next to each item and totalled. The shop kept the top copy, and the order was then delivered on a set day each week with the returned order book. Mum could see how much she owed and pay the bill. Speaking of paying bills reminds me of something else. Being paid in cash like most workers, Dad kept some of his weekly pay for spending money. Mum had an old cash tin in which she put the rest. She divided it between the compartments, so much for rent, for groceries, the electric bill, etc. Whenever you bought anything at the co-op, which had all kinds of shops and even department stores, you got a receipt that was like a little ticket. It just had the total you had spent written on it by hand, together with your dividend number. These tickets were in sheets, again in a carbon book, so the co-op had a copy too. As the customers of the co-op, the cooperative society, were its shareholders, and still are, every customer had one of these dividend numbers, and each year the profit was divided up between them. You received dividend money proportional to how much you had spent. This divvy came in very handy, especially coming up to Christmas time. There are still co-ops around, but nowhere near as many as 50 years ago, and now it is swipe cards rather than writing out tickets. We had no supermarkets. The first self-service shop in England, Sainsbury's, which is now a supermarket chain of course, opened in London in 1950, but these did not start to reach us for a few more years. In ordinary shops there might be some items on display that you could pick up and take to the counter, but mostly you asked for what you wanted and the shop assistant got it for you. Shops closed for an afternoon once a week, the same day for all the shops in each town, usually a Wednesday or Thursday. This was known as either early closing or half-day closing day. With the staff working Saturdays, it gave them an extra half-day off. Nearly all shops closed on Sunday, although newsagents delivered the papers and opened for a few hours. It was the same with bank holidays, and I don't remember any shop that was open on Good Friday, Christmas Day or Boxing Day, nor of course on Easter Sunday, which remains the same now. One quirky thing was that on a Sunday, although shops could sell food that was ready to eat, no shop was allowed to sell food that needed cooking. The only shop I remember that was open on a Sunday when we lived in Bletchley was a sweet shop in Aylesbury Street, which also sold homemade ice cream. You had to take your own bowl to be filled. It was delicious, and I believe that was called Golding's. There was a very good postal mail service. Letters were all one price to send, no two-tier system, and nearly always arrived by the next day. We had 2 deliveries a day as well, one quite early in the morning and another in the afternoon. What we didn't have, and that I wouldn't miss now, was all the junk mail coming through the letterbox. Crime rates were quite low. Gun crime in England was extremely rare then. I'm afraid we associated that kind of crime with America. I don't remember ever hearing anything about an illegal drug trade either, though I'm sure some went on. But again, it was very uncommon. However, suicide and abortion were both crimes, and those such as domestic violence and abuse tended to often go unreported and unpunished. It's odd sometimes the things you remember. I hated the toilet paper we had to use. It was in sheets, pulled out of a box rather than on a roll, although the box fitted into a wall holder, and it was so hard and stiff. The closest thing I can describe it to is being nearly like greaseproof paper, not quite as thick and shiny or as wax paper. You would pull out a sheet about the same size as a sheet of soft toilet roll, crumple it and rub it between your hands to soften it. How it ever absorbed anything, I do not know. At Stuartby, Dad still used the old hard stuff for several years after we had soft toilet paper, so we had to keep 2 lots on the toilet wall. Throughout my early life we had no other kind of disposable wipes. For example, we had no paper tissues but used our cotton handkerchiefs, which Mum boil washed. Oh, thinking of those hankies, I remember how when I was little and must have had a dirty face, Auntie Nellie, though never Mum, would spit on her hanky and wipe my face clean with it. I just hated that. Spills and mess were all cleaned up with cloths, which would be not just washed but boil washed regularly. The aforementioned greaseproof paper was the only wrap we had, no foil, no cling film. And there were no plastic bags either, no carrier bags, you just took your own shopping bags with you. We didn't have plastic bottles, and I don't remember drinks in cans. You paid a deposit when you bought drinks in glass bottles. This was returned when you took the bottles back. We children would sometimes take back bottles in return for keeping the few pence deposit. It may seem strange now, but all of this was quite normal for us then, as of course we'd never known any different. Some people tend to look at the past through rose-tinted glasses, as no doubt you would discover if you haven't already. I believe that some things were better when I was a child, and some were worse than they are now. It would be wonderful if we could take the best of the past and add it to the best of the present, discarding the worst of each. And now I can honestly say that is the end of setting the scene, and next we'll be on to my beginning.